Charly Kleissner, welcome to the high-level consultation of the Club of Rome Rethinking Finance Hub. The purpose of
Mariana, it's an honor to be here, and thanks for reaching out, and I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, thank you. So the purpose of this consultation is to take a transdisciplinary approach to reinventing finance, the intention is to capture ideas from some of the brightest minds on our planet in order to transform the financial system and to finance the transformation. Because obviously, and as COVID-19 has shown us, the old system doesn't work, and it didn't work. And from my perspective, this is just a dress rehearsal for could come if we don't wake up early enough to address the existential issues and problems that humanity is facing. So the first question is, from your perspective, how can we jumpstart the economy after COVID-19, and what is your recommendation? What are the acupuncture points that we should be addressing, short term, middle term, and long term?
Well, great. So that's a great starting question, and it also allows me to frame it and go a little bit deeper into how you framed it. And so I believe, like you do, that the great transformation has already started, right? And the great transformation is the transformation that's going on to help humanity live within the carrying constraints of a finitely resourced planet, right? In that donut space that was articulated so well by others. And so COVID-19 is just an expression of the issues that humanity has caused the planet, and the planet is responding to that, as any system does, if the pressures get too big. So we know from a systems perspective that systems only change if there's enough pressure to change it, and they don't change if there's not enough pressure. And if you think about why COVID-19 happened and go to the root causes as opposed to the symptoms, then eventually you're going to end up thinking about the living spaces of species, right? Because I think if the species on this planet live too close together, then viruses that are not supposed to jump from one species to the other. So what causes that proximity that can become toxic for one or multiple species? Well, I would think that it is a combination of deeper issues like loss of habitat, for instance, right? So if a species gets so distressed, they move closer to where they are not supposed to be, and that's a consequence of loss of habitat. Why does loss of habitat happen? Well, because clear-cutting trees is more profitable than not clear-cutting trees. It's because big ag is more profitable doing the monocultures that they do and neglecting the issues of biodiversity. So nature has been teaching us for a long time what sustainability practices really mean. And I would say they're, circularity, meaning without waste. So if we were to design our financial system and our economic system without waste, that would be a good thing. It is about biodiversity, and it is about photosynthesis and making sure that we use energy that's produced by nature and not by something that actually pollutes nature. And so in this context, right, I just made the argument that COVID-19 happened because a design mistake of the economic and financial system. And so your question has to be taken in that context, because if we now address some of the symptoms without making sure that we address the symptoms with a view on not, at least not contributing to the systemic misdesigns of the underlying causes, hopefully even better that we design it in a way that actually accelerates the transition and not hinders the transition that I started talking about. And that is the question of the day, right? And so to me, jumpstarting the system we will have an opportunity to address maybe some of the issues that were plainly visible, even to a non-trained economic eye, For instance, we saw the breakdown of global supply chains in the food system, in the pharmaceutical system, and not yet, but in the energy production and consumption system. COVID didn't really show that, but that's a third system that has to be fixed. But in the food supply system, for instance, it has been plainly obvious, right, that the global systems are not resilient enough in order to take these shocks and absorb these shocks in a way that doesn't distress the local and regional economies. So if we would take this opportunity, for instance, and start redesigning the global food systems such that they become more resilient, that would be a good thing, and people would understand, hopefully, that that is a good thing now because they've seen what happens if it breaks down. Now, with respect to just one more system, and then we'll go back maybe to follow-on questions, is the medical system, right? The medical system was at the forefront of the response, and so treating the symptoms, particularly in countries like the US, where the medical system is just not designed for resilience. It's not designed for alleviating inequality. It's not designed for alleviating social injustice. COVID-19 showed the ugliness of that system. And if we just treat the symptoms, meaning that we make sure that supply chains of respirators and masks and all of that are there, well, then we haven't done it justice, right? And it's a huge opportunity to do that. So let me conclude my introductory remarks by saying, we are in the middle of this disruption, and we need to disrupt the desire of the system to go back to its old design.
Right. So these consultations gravitate around changing finance and financing change. So from your perspective, let's go back to the finance sector, and I would like for you to reflect upon the factors that are not functioning within the financial system. You are an investor, you're a serial entrepreneur, you're founder of TONIIC. What is it that you have tried with your own interventions, with your own investments, entrepreneurial activities, and others? What dysfunctionality of the financial system have you tried to address, and why? And how can, moving forward, what are the acupuncture points within this financial system that we need to address?
Yeah. So let's go directly into opportunities for alleviating the short-term pain, the midterm opportunities, and the long-term opportunities. So now we're to the point where we can discuss what specifically can we do and why, and what would it fix, right? So let's start out with the short-term opportunities, right? Because I think the pain and the suffering is real, and it's real for many, many people, and particularly for the disadvantaged people and the people that are poor. And on the enterprise side, it's similarly, social enterprises who also depend on financing, of course, and making sure that the demand side is coming back for services that are temporarily not being paid for. We need to make sure that these enterprises actually not only survive, but thrive. So what are the 4 or 5 short-term interventions that we can do to make sure that that happens? Well, one thing is that we need to provide cheap capital to the organizations that are serving the poorest of the poor with loans, for instance, because the poorest of the poor during crisis like this, they don't have access to capital. They don't even have access to any source of capital. And in the US, the CDFIs, the community development financing institutions, are a great way of making sure that we provide capital to these poorest of the poor, right? Along the same lines, we need to restructure and forgive loans, right? Because I just made the point that a lot of businesses don't have the cash flow evened out because of the lack of demand in a pandemic like this. And so we need to, impact investors particularly, we need to be at the forefront of alleviating the pain that they have to pay back at a time when they cannot pay back the loans, right? And so a little bit more of a stretch for many people short term, but I would also think that that's a short term intervention that makes sense, is to move to more blended capital structures. And blended capital structures are structures where you have two different or three different types of capital that demands different returns with respect to financial returns and impact returns, and combine them into a financing structure that together can actually alleviate these issues and build for the future in the midterm and long term. Because if we just patch things up without having more sustainability in the way that we finance these things, and they will break down again downstream. I think from a regulatory standpoint, on the short term, we should just for a bit, take out algorithmic trading and just say that's not a productive way of using our systems and technology to just invest without providing any discernible good impact or any product or service to humanity. And similarly, I think it's time to regulate the hedge funds back into the system so that we at least know what's going on. And so these are opportunities in the short term, and some of them can be taken into the midterm. So midterm, I think that it's an opportunity to rethink venture capital and why it doesn't work for equities, for that matter, for the impact economy, particularly for the deep impact economy, right? So if you think back about why venture capital was invented, it was invented because of Moore's law, where the CPU powers, the computer powers, doubled every 18 months, which created nice exits, financial exits for the venture capital community after about 5 to 10 years, right? And so that system was designed for a single time financial exit, maximizing the returns for limited partners and the general partners, with no discernible concern about long-term sustainability. And we have to redesign the system just the opposite, namely that we design it such that it has long-term positive sustainable impact with an acceptable financial return. So you see how I had to reframe it totally upside down in order to make the point, that obviously, venture doesn't fit an economy, where you provide services to everybody and you charge an appropriate amount. There is no unicorns for that matter. Maybe a few, exceptions are always there, but the basic tenet of the new deep impact economy has to be done by digitalizing impact, making it tokenized, right? And then you can trade it, and then you can use it. And so as we move to this new economy based on some new technology, we can go away from the old way of financial exits without long-term sustainable impact, and make sure that all the stakeholders are incentivized to do that by leveraging tokenization and financing structures that go beyond that. In the midterm, we should also democratize impact investing so that it's not only an activity for the rich. And there's some efforts going on right now that could be accelerated with legislation on the crowdfunding platform side and crowd and campaign, structuring campaigns, social campaigns or environmental campaigns with financing behind it and things of that nature. We could midterm create social stock exchanges where people who just have a few euros to invest can actually invest in public equities that are a little bit better than the non-public equities. So those are all concrete ideas, with respect to changing the midterm trajectory of the financial system. And of course, moving beyond ESG. And I think one that's really, really important is breaking up the monopolies of the banks that they claim are too big to fail. How stupid is that? I mean, monopolies are not good for the environment. They're not good for society. They're not good for the workers. They're not good for anybody except for the monopolists, right? And so we do need to convince our politicians, that needs to happen. So how do we do that? Well, we need to elevate the consciousness of the consumers and the people to understand what I'm just talking about. And then they will rise up and say, we demand that this is regulated and done differently, which brings me to the last piece, and that's the long-term opportunity of changing the financial system. And that's, we are running on the wrong theory. And the theory is called modern portfolio theory, which has nothing to do with modern. It's old, it's antiquated, it doesn't work. It has nothing to say about systemic change. Like we talk about systemic change. And even Markowitz himself said, this is not a systemic change theory. We're just reinterpreting it, even against his own will, just like GDP, we shouldn't use that as a proxy for well-being. And so those are the long-term opportunities to rethink the underpinning theories and metrics that we use in order to manage growth, in order to manage well-being, in order to manage what progress means. And so that will require, more of a concerted effort from all the silos, including practitioners, including legislation, including research, and including the consciousness that goes along with that, to get the courage to say, now is the time to change these systems long term. And that's, maybe I end up by, since that was on my thoughts a little bit the other day, Shambhala warriors, is long term. How does that work? Well, it's the emergence of consciousness that we can observe right now, and that were the people who have the know-how and the awareness and the consciousness and the networks to do something, they will have the courage by doing their own internal work to actually say, we will change the system as it first is just disrupted and very painful for everybody. That is the emergence of the new system long term. Maybe it goes short term too, who knows? It's hard to predict. Nobody can predict when it's going to happen. We just know it will happen now.
Right. So before we go to the mind shift and the consciousness change, which is a longer conversation that I'd like to have with you, I'd like to go back a little bit to the policy interventions and the legislative interventions that need to occur in order to implement, the short, medium, and long-term recommendations that you made.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example from Germany that is currently, or at the European level, that is currently happening. Yeah. So COVID-19 has initiated this, what we call a printing money,
Yeah.
in order to make it available to those in need right now. It's a wonderful thing. We have done that after the 2008 financial crisis, and it went into the wrong hands, and it helped the old system to perpetuate itself. Basically, we were printing money, making liquidity available into a bankrupt system, and that was actually proven. Now we're doing the same thing. It's needed to put money into people's pockets, but that perpetuate the old mistake. We haven't changed the system. So what needs to happen in order to slowly but surely create a system that is different from the one that we have saved in 2008? Because what the financial crisis has shown, that this trickle-down system where you make money available to the banks, that supposedly makes money available to the people that you mentioned, in need, serial entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, the bottom of the pyramid. They don't get it because they don't have the assets that the banks required in order to make these, the claims and get the money. So from your perspective, what policy interventions and what legislative interventions and in what time frame would have to occur in order for transformation to happen? And that's a big question. I understand. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, no, that is the fundamental question. It's the right question to ask, right? Because right now it looks like a lot of the mistakes that we have done, as you pointed out in 2008, are being repeated, right? And so the question is, why are they being repeated, right? And I go back to the awareness and consciousness of the citizens and the people who elect their leaders, right? We cannot hide behind the fact that every society, well, not every, but every democratic society is electing the leaders that reflect who they are, right? And so we need to acknowledge that it doesn't look that great, in the US particularly, but other countries as well, with respect to the leadership. And we need to, and so without that, all of what we discuss will not happen, because it will just be an intellectual exercise, and maybe even a heartfelt exercise, or even a soul-felt exercise by some of us that really has no chance of actualization, in the real society. And so, but if we were to work, the creators and what we talk about in the impact investing community, we are making progress. We don't know if it's going to be fast enough or not. Nobody knows. We cannot debate that, but we are making progress. So what are some of the ideas, that we haven't discussed yet? I talked about it briefly. In some countries, particularly countries that are led by female prime ministers have already made that switch to move away from GDP to well-being, right? And measure the wellness of their societies with respect to the wellness of their citizens, and not with the mythical exponential growth of something that actually contributes to the demise of the planet, right? So that's one. I think the EU is also at the forefront of regulating for what I would say, the principles of circularity and regenerativity. And even so, it doesn't go far enough, but it's certainly further than China and the US. And so I think that the EU particularly has an opportunity, and in my opinion, even a responsibility to be a counterpoint to the existing trends in the US and the existing trends in China. If the EU were able to do that, they should not be scared like maybe some people are in normalizing the whole globe right now to the least common denominator. No, no, no. Europe has the ethical backbone and the philosophical know-how, to insist on something that the monopolistic US economy and the state-run Chinese, economy cannot possibly do. And therefore, I encourage, and hope, and we need to give the EU from wherever we sit, the confidence that they're on the right path, even if big companies are pushing back, and give them the confidence that they should not, like is going on in different parts of the globe, support and subsidize the old extractive industries that are just going to contribute exponentially, to climate change and social injustice. I think we need to radically transform the tax system to tax resource consumption, right, with a progressive tax. And there are some signs for that, right, but not enough. And it's a big change, but without doing that, the wrong things are taxed, and the externalities that are therefore still occurring are then pushed off to society, which is wrong, right? And so moving the tax system to that. And then I think the EU is starting to enforce, ESG reporting, and it should also enforce negative impact reporting, right? For instance, so that we know, because, frankly, I don't want to invest in the most beautifully run, most diversely run weapons manufacturer, even if they use green steel to manufacture their beautiful weapons. I don't, because they get a huge ESG score, right? And it just doesn't really fit into my values and how we should run the economy. And one idea, that also has been at the forefront, maybe in Europe more than everywhere else on the planet, is universal base income, right? People are not talking about job losses that much anymore, maybe a few pockets, but the fact of the matter is that, hopefully 2/3 of the jobs that we're losing right now will come back. I even fear that less will come back. So the we had this discussion before COVID about technology, getting rid of many jobs, which is true over time, right? But this is an accelerator now, and therefore, universal base income, or what I would say universal earned income, is a huge opportunity for humanity to make a difference on the income level for the poor and the marginalized. So the idea is that we move away from the Google and Facebook model, who monetize our behavior, right, our digital behavior, and then send us ads that we really didn't ask for, and then manipulate us to sit in front of their apps longer than we intend to, in order to get served more ads that we didn't want to. And that's how that economy is run. And most people, I think, would by now pay for real, deep, good content, right? And they would also want an opportunity to own their data. And so with modern technology and AI, artificial intelligence, and maybe blockchain, I can imagine, and I'm working with a couple of startups on that topic, I can imagine a system, where I will be able to monetize the data that I generate, the health data, where I am, whom I talk to, what I do in which context, and I think that that's doable now or soon, with respect to, let's say in India we have 1.4 billion Android phones, and it's just $15 per phone, and gigabytes up and down are practically you know, you don't have to pay for that anymore if you don't go into multiple gigabytes. And therefore, everybody has a digital footprint. So if we develop an infrastructure that actually enables the people to own their data and then sell their digital footprint or donate it to somebody, you know, I've had cancer, and if my Apple Watch right now is monitoring my health to a certain extent, and I don't want to necessarily enable Apple to analyze all my data in unanonymized and all that. I would like to enable, you know, a research institution that does lymphoma research, and I would give it for free with my name attached to it. But if an insurance wants my data, I would charge an arm and a leg, or I wouldn't even sell it to them, right? And so that the new world, in order to have that available for everybody, will have to move in that, and that would be an opportunity, you know, to legislate and break up these huge monopolies that are on the downhill anyway. But we don't know when they're going to be replaced. And so those are, I think, a few opportunities for the legislation to be forward-looking and to make sure that if they do save big industries, it's only done with stipulating real change with respect to accountability and responsibility on the social and environmental side, that they actually accelerate subsidizing social enterprises and small and medium enterprises in order, because they are the backbone of sustainability ultimately, and that they legislate then that into top down, and the EU should absolutely start with a focus on ethical, you know, principles.
Thank you so much for basically confirming what I'm saying all along, that small enterprises are the backbone of sustainability transformation. And my question to you is, do you think that government will change in order to implement what you just suggested, or whatever needs to be done?
No.
Enough.
Government will not.
Will the small and medium enterprises, through their successes like Amazon or Facebook or Google, will basically force a new behavior, new systems, create new systems just because of their creativity and innovation, whereby forcing legislation later on, like with Uber or Airbnb and so on? What do you think? Who's going to win first?
Yeah.
Because like you, I am.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, we talked about the real inspiration of the EU government and all and legislation, right? And which it is. And so that shouldn't take away from the comment that I'm making now, namely that it seems like on the entrepreneurial changes of society with what's referred to as the gig economy and modern ways of working, you know, COVID is teaching us that too now. And I've been really underwhelmed by the power of the unions in Europe particularly, that prevent, you know, legislation to actually be modernized. And with the old medieval system of common and these organizations where you have to be a member even if you don't want to be a member, and you have to pay their dues even if you don't want to. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's part of the old system, right? And governments have to throw this out because it does not help anybody. You know, Wirtschaftskammer and Ärztekammer, all these things are like, you know, past systems. So we need to be more imaginative about how we, you know, now that COVID has actually taught people who were very skeptical about, you know, working from home. We do our interview over Zoom, right? And we know each other, so there's no issue in interpreting our you know, how we feel about things as we talk and all that. And that will be, you know, necessary as well. And so the legislation, unfortunately, doesn't get pressure enough from that side of the system, saying we are responsible for the old systems that we maintain and we need to break them up. Legislation is not courageous enough to break up the monopolies, even so EU is doing the most on the planet of that. And I encourage them to break up, you know, Google and Facebook and everything else too, if they could, because that's part of the problem, right? And but the governments will not have the courage to do that if they don't get an indicator from their constituencies that they will get reelected if they do that. And as a matter of fact, they will not get reelected if they don't do that. And there is the gap, you know. So we talk about consciousness, maybe we don't. But I want to give an example of consciousness and how it prevented the government in Hawaii from doing the wrong thing because the population started waking up to something.
Yeah,
So in Hawaii,
let's talk
yeah,
about mind shift and consciousness. Extremely important. Let's do
yeah.
that now.
Okay, so I give an example that's going to be really illustrative of what has to happen in order to do that. So my wife Lisa and I were quite active in Hawaii, and we have a business accelerator for social entrepreneurs there. So we're quite active there and know a lot of the infrastructure players and what have you. Now in the state of Hawaii, big capital has always been able to finance, big infrastructure projects or big telescopes on very holy sites. Mauna Kea, the biggest, the tallest volcano in Hawaii, being the holiest mountain for the Hawaiians, and yet, big business was able to push through all these 18, 20, 24 telescopes that partially are not even used anymore. And what happened in the past 2 years in Hawaii is that yet another huge, the biggest telescope is supposed to be built, right? And the resistance formed, and they have, and then a non-violent resistance, and they have these, what do they call them? Protectors, right? That are up in Mauna Kea and protect the holy lands. And they don't, they partially have to go to jail, but they, they do what they do in order to protect the land. And the governor normally would just force them out and would allow, big capital to come in and put in the new telescope. What happened is that the majority of the people, Hawaiians and non-Hawaiians, are not allowing that anymore. So without the majority of the people not allowing that anymore, the governor would have activated the National Guard, which has no connectivity to the local population, and they're coming in from the mainland, so they don't even understand the spirit of aloha and consciousness that the Hawaiians understand. And because the local sheriffs and the local people are part of Hawaiians, right? And so they would really not want to fight their people if they're non-violently protesting something that's bad for them anyway. And so only because of that consciousness and awareness having lifted is that particular intervention not going to be allowed anymore, right? And so that's a beautiful opportunity, I think, to reflect on what would it take, for the consciousness of the Brazilian people, to wake up and say, oh, we actually care about the Amazon, not only for ourselves, but for humanity. And we need to figure out how to make sure that we can, support that and not like the current, legislation there, cutting it down. In the US, if the population would wake up and say, okay, we have an opportunity, to go to renewable energy and be the leader, and we are not allowing that, that level. If the majority of the people would demand that, the government would have to do that, or they would not be reelected. And so so that's what I mean by awakening and consciousness. Without the awakening and consciousness, the old forces that are the power structures and that don't allow the other voices to be heard, because media is also in the pocket of the big companies, right? In the pocket of the big politicians. So we need, modern media that actually goes beyond the existing, landscapes to do that. So that's what I mean by, in Germany, I wonder, what the issue is, why coal cannot be, not done anymore, and why we have to wait 15, 20 more years, in order not to do coal. What's lacking in the understanding of the general populace that says, no, we shouldn't do coal anymore, and the 40,000 people that are going to lose their jobs, we can afford to re-educate the younger ones and to give pensions to the other ones, as opposed to keeping them on payroll to continue to mess up the lives of the commons, and so what would it take to wake up the people on that level? That's the question that I ask for my contribution over the next 30 years, in the rest of my life.
Yeah, and I believe that the collective consciousness, which is the one that you've talked about, begins with the evolution of individual consciousness. And
yes,
as you and I
couldn't agree more with you on that, because the only way to contribute to the collective consciousness is to be in order with yourself. So because your life is a direct expression of who you are inside, not of your brain and not of your heart, but of the soul, of who you are on the soul level. And therefore, if your soul is scattered, if your soul is confused, it will show in the work of your life, and not, in a non-judgmental way. So I didn't want to say that that's either good or bad. It is just how it is. But the way that you cultivate that will have an impact. And the human consciousness, is to a certain extent the summary of the collective consciousness of all of us. And that's why the warriors of the spiritual warriors, that as Shambhala calls it, the emergence of awareness, as I call it, are the counterpoint. And if that doesn't happen, nothing will change. And then we don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows. We just have to do what we have to do, and maybe it changes, maybe it doesn't.
Right. So one of the intentions with this initiative of the Financial Hub is to aggregate enough wisdom of illustrious minds across the world to come a little bit closer to the tipping point where the next level of consciousness becomes obvious, and we don't really know, and the shift actually occurs because it's self-understood by 11%, as they say, where the tipping point lies. So
11, and so going back
somewhere
to,
around that,
going back to the beginning of our conversation, right? So if we end up only treating the symptoms of COVID-19, then nothing will change short term, except that the next bigger pandemic, the next disruption that's bigger than Australia, that's bigger than California with respect to climate change disruptions, are going to happen. You don't need to have a PhD in economy to understand that anymore, right? And so it's up to us, and if we don't, well, then we will be reminded bigger, and we will be reminded bigger and bigger and bigger until the system breaks. And we just don't know when the system will break, but if we don't get ahead of that, then it will eventually break, and that will then be the opportunity, and that will be majorly painful for the majority of the humanity. Then if we wait that long, at that point in time, then it will change forcibly, because the planet cannot sustain it anymore, and therefore that's what it does.
So within that context, the next question for you: with whom do you think should we, the Club of Rome, we, the ones that are gathering, various organizations, partner up with in order to reach that tipping point? Who are the organizations from your point of view that are already there, that get it, with whom to join forces? We can join forces and break the silos, because one of the biggest issues that I see, having been joining with you in this field for decades, is it's the non-invented here syndrome. So everyone is creating their own thing and trying to be the one that breaks through, but we can only achieve something together if we join forces. So who are those partners? Who are and how can we fund ourselves?
So that's a critical question as well, right? Because I do believe that right now I would consider Club of Rome, our club, to be part of the old world, not the new one today, right? And so the question is, how can we, and I want to make a contribution, so I'm not just critical, but I'll say, what can I do, to enable that to get to the to the new way of doing things, collaborative, inclusive, diverse, networks of networks, and all of that. And so I think a modern media strategy is part of what we have to do. And so instead of writing books and going to the old channels and going to the old conferences, right, we need to, there's emerging networks right now, and COVID is actually accelerating that. And so I see quite a few very interesting efforts going on, that are reimagining the beauty of digital connectivity and regional digital global connectivity and regional in-person connectivity, right? And how that actually interacts. And so I think the Club of Rome is a white club that's Northern Hemisphere centric. And if we don't change that, then that's what it is. And so unless you change it, that's what you get, right? Because white Northern clubs produce things for white Northerners. That's how it works, because we're all biased, right? And so opening up our own doors and getting the diversity, in it. Without that, we can intellectualize and think about what we want to do, but it's not going to happen, right? Because we are who we are, and therefore, unless we change who we are, we will not be able to to go beyond that. And I think so that's the starting point, is to if we want to do that, is to make it more global, make it more inclusive, and make it more reflective of society as a whole, right? And number two then is similarly, do that in a way that's the modern communication way with modern technology, right? The networks of networks approach. And number three is, don't forget the consciousness. The Club of Rome is very brainy and good. I like an intellectual exercise, and I like to spar. I have a PhD in computer science. I like that too, but I don't confuse what my brain says with who I am. And that's and that's really, really, really important on the human level, right? And I see a lack of acknowledgement in that. I don't, in the current setup and how we practice things. And again, this is all friendly criticism, not sharp criticism. But it's also, I mean it also, because if we don't change it, then we will not be able to have the impact that you and I and others want to have. And if that were the case, then I would leave in 1 or 2 years, because why waste my time on something that is not going to change? And so I think it's in order to attract the talent and the people that are designing the new system, we need to make it a nice place for them, and we need to be challenged by them. We need to be able to digest their criticism. We need to be able to not judge them, and that requires a quite elevated level of consciousness itself.
Right. So to move away from the Aristotelian-centric mindset, the European Platonic thinking, toward a more inclusive Asian that is so much wiser and deeper and older. I couldn't agree more with you on this. So do you have any concrete partnership ideas? Whom do you think we should be interviewing? Who else from this part of the world? One of the reasons why I have agreed to co-chair the nominations committee is exactly that, to address exactly what you just said. So since you are a global force for good, do you have any concrete recommendations? Maybe people, or you could send me that via email if you have any ideas later on. But this is a very important issue and initiative. If we really want to define ourselves and be around in the next 50 years, so we can celebrate the 100-year anniversary.
So I think we're seeing now. So now is the time to be attentive, right? Because now is the time when new organizations that understand the post-COVID opportunities and challenges better, they put their stake in the ground, and in whatever, in a few months, and it goes fast now, they will replace the old organizations that are not able to make that switch. So there are organizations, right, that are being formed right now that are modern and that will be the leaders, and so we need to be attentive to that. I've worked with one in the last 3-4 weeks called Phoenix, and Ton and Masha are the leaders in that, and they have pivoted, totally from the pre-COVID world to the post, with respect to their knowledge base, with respect to how they organize themselves and all of that. And so I think that and then any other networks that have entrepreneurial leaders that are conscious about what we talked about on the awareness side as well, it's an opportunity to do these networks of networks without creating a single network, and reach out to some of them, and then use modern technology to build these connectivity tissues, right? That enables cooperation, collaboration, inspiration, and emergence to happen. So we don't know exactly how to do all of that, but I think I'll give you an example out of the TONIIC world, where I'm leading an effort called Deep Impact, and Deep Impact is defined by systemic change in consciousness, and doing it in a non-anthropocentric way, just like deep ecology. is doing deep ecology as opposed to ecology. And I've thought about, well, how do I enable a global community, but with the connectivity on the personal side, to thrive. And YPO has done what they call forums, which have been very successful in creating regional global support groups, right? And then overlaying it with a digital platform to create thematic types of opportunities across forums. And I'm going a little bit in the same direction, but turning it upside down, saying we have digital global forums, and once in a while we meet physically when the time is right, and all of that. And so I think that that we have an opportunity to create real strong networks digitally, with modern technology, and using it not to replace global meetings, not at all, but in order to create meaningful connectivity on a planetary scale that then we can leverage in the offline world to do the human connectivity on top of that. So I think we're seeing a turnaround in that, and I don't anticipate the mega global events to come back before 2022, if at all, right? Because they're just not the right model.
They're not, and they're so superficial, because if you really think about it, you only get like 5 to 10 minutes to give your thing. So there is no opportunity to really dig deeper into thinking, or even as a woman, this is a very male-oriented way of doing things. Just one train of thought and shoot it in 5 minutes. As a woman, I need a process. I need to get into various states of consciousness and feelings and connect before I can open and begin to generate ideas. So this is why I insisted
totally.
I insisted on this format of gathering our collective ideas, that it opens up the door for a deeper conversation, as you said, deep impact. Well, wonderful. I think we've come to an end. One more question for you. You mentioned technology over and over again. As a computer scientist and AI person myself, I love what you're saying. I just completed writing my book on integral impact, and trying to respond to the Club of Rome that we do need technology if we really want to address climate change, which is not a common train of thought within that group. So
no, we do,
So yes, please give us your thoughts on the role. Two things. The role, just is to summarize, because I keep hearing within the Club of Rome, we don't need more technology, and the truth is, it's not right. So what is your train of thought along those areas as far as exponential technologies are concerned, and also the role of entrepreneurship?
So I have this, because of my background, excuse me, I've decided to work on the intersection, the confluence of 3 mega themes, right? And not in priority order. It's deep impact, and then it's consciousness and technology, right? And I think that technology is a huge enabler and can also be a huge disruptor, and it's a very dangerous time for humanity in order to harness either technology or to let it go rogue, so to speak, which will have bigger consequences. I'm not arguing like Elon Musk and others that AI, artificial intelligence, will become consciousness. No, in my opinion, consciousness, human consciousness, has been in evolution for 5 billion years, and it's just unimaginable for me to even think that we could copy evolution and do that the magic that they have done over that many years. But having said this, right, I think that the consequences of predictive models, and the consequences of learning algorithms, and the consequences of big data sets that are wrong many times are real, and they either perpetuate and augment and increase suffering, or they are used to move us beyond that. And that's why I thought, that's why I think it's so important to have the ethical framework agreed upon. Ultimately, it has to be agreed upon globally, right? I don't anticipate that the US and China will lead that effort right now, and that I fear that Europeans are falling behind because they're not investing enough in technology. But be that as it may, right? I think that I also think that the global food production, for 10 billion people, if we should be 10 billion people or close to that in a few years, can be done without technology. And I'm not meaning, monocultures. I'm not meaning, lack of biodiversity. I mean the opposite. The technology can be used to actually do more productive, cross cropping and all the, more organic and more biodynamic, but with more sensors and more understanding of what's going on. And lastly, I don't see enough technology being applied to understanding consciousness. And so there's a small group of people, who invest in that, and I think that we're making a little bit of progress. It's on the fringes of modern science, because modern science, for whatever reason, thinks that we are superior to the universe as opposed to trying to figure out how the universe actually works, and that's a fundamental flaw. But I'm very intrigued in the feedback loops in how consciousness and subconsciousness works together. And as 10-day silent meditations actually allow you to experience that yourself predictably. So there's no magic behind that. If you sit still for 10 days, things are going to happen that otherwise would not happen. And one of the things that happens is you start understanding a little bit the interactions between the subconsciousness and the consciousness, and you start understanding that the consciousness makes up all these stories, and you observe them as opposed to being consumed by them, right? And so we know the shamans and the old wisdom traditions, they have formulas that actually work in getting your mind into a different mindset that you can experience that. And so I think that that's really if I could maybe do my small contribution to enable technology also consciousness, right? And then, like I said, go deeper on the impact side, because if impact events, measuring impact is difficult, right? Especially if you're talking about long-term outcomes and what have you. But if we put these impact events on a blockchain, so they're immutable and they cannot be changed anymore, then people can pay for them, right? And that's happening now. And this is going to be the new system. And that's going to replace social impact bonds, because it's so difficult to do controlled study groups to prove that something happened. And I'm glad to participate in some of these beautifully emerging, technologies that will make a big change in how we do impact and how we do consciousness. So that's an interesting, conference, but we have to be really careful that it doesn't get out of hand. And that can only be done again with elevated consciousness, because unless the humanity agrees that that's a bad thing for humanity to happen, it will happen.
Yes, thank you. And this is why for many years now, I've been an advocate of the Club of Rome getting deeply involved in this conversation with respect to AI development and ethical AI and the moral application of because as the AI is as good as the individual bias level of consciousness of the programmers. And so, but as long as we don't have that understanding, we will create egocentric applications that are going to mislead us. Well, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. This is just the beginning, and I am thrilled. Thank you for your wonderful thoughts, and we'll let you know when the video is available online. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And, give my love to Lisa. Take care. Bye.
I will. Bye.
Bye.